Yeah, no, we got 4. I think we just dive right in.
Okay, we're going to go.
You ready to start this thing?
Yes. Hey, welcome, everybody, to Generationally Speaking, where we take today's topics and we look at them from a perspective of 2 different generations. Jordan, our online pastor, happens to be our resident millennial. I was going to try so hard not to make a mess of this. And I'm Brad. And, I'm a boomer. So there you go.
Season 4, episode 6, titled The Birds, the Bees, and Porn.
We are not excited
No.
about this whole thing.
No. I did a sermon on pornography during our family series. I don't remember what it was called. But we talked about pornography because of how often porn infiltrates our relationships, our friendships, our marriages, our kids' lives, our spouses' lives, and what can we do
And this is something, honestly,
to navigate it.
Because, pornography's been around forever.
Right.
Literally forever.
Yeah.
Even back in first century biblical times. But your generation was really the first generation that really grew up exposed to this at a very, very young age.
Right.
Back in my day, you might come across
Stumble across something.
a random magazine somewhere that someone threw out or what have you. We just search garbage cans all the time. But
Yeah.
no. But seriously,
Yeah.
your generation grew up with this prevalent in their lives.
Yeah, and I remember being exposed to pornography via YouTube in 7th grade. That was my first time.
Yeah.
Now the average age is anywhere from 9 to 13 years old.
The stats we're going to get to is just absolutely scary.
Absolutely. And it's only getting worse because even just the way that pornography is, a couple reasons. One, the amount of pornography that's available and what media sources are allowing. It's same thing with radio stations allowing more and more swear words. Back when I was growing up, you couldn't say any of the swear words. And then when I got to high school, it was like, well, the A word's okay, the D word's okay. Now it's pretty much everything but the F word shows up on secular stations.
And I'll be honest with you, pornography as I see it, that was a terrible way to put that. Pornography as I see it.
Our lead pastor, ladies and gentlemen. Right. That's why we're worried about this.
This is what scares me about tonight, honestly.
Yeah.
No, but there are regular advertisements on TV and stuff that would have been considered pornography in my day.
Right. And that's why I was saying, I think the definition is so different, but then also what media is allowing nowadays. Like things that used to be PG-13 are now PG. If you had a sex scene in your movie or in your TV show, it automatically bumped it up to R. Now those are PG-13.
Yeah.
It's like, even when you go to social media, Twitter, you can find nudity all over Twitter.
Right.
TikTok, you can find pornography and different videos and live streams all over TikTok. Snapchat, it's becoming so much more accessible, and that's just what they would consider softcore porn.
Right.
Then, of course, you get to the hardcore pornography that, again, a lot of it's digital. But now, with virtual reality, I don't know if you've seen any of the VR porn announcements and stuff that have come out of where.
No, I've not seen any VR porn.
I know you've not seen any VR porn, but now.
Yeah, no, I didn't even know it existed.
But now,
that was the first
the
I've heard of
porn
it.
industry is now taking the next step into
Really?
virtual reality. Yeah, man. And so, why it's important that we talk about it?
Yeah.
Okay, because like I said, a couple months ago, I did a sermon on pornography. Had a ton of people, adults, young adults, teenagers who have reached out to me. I've been able to walk with a few of our teens and parents especially saying, how do we navigate this conversation with our teens? Because you have a smartphone, no matter how many blocks you put on your smartphone, you still have access to pornography. It's insane. Then you not just digitally, but books, commercials, TV shows.
And you've done the hard work
crazy.
of actually researching some of this and things like that. And I'll be honest with you, I have not.
Sure.
And I think it's partly because, again, your generation.
I'm going to have to navigate this with a ton of young people.
You have got to navigate this for the upcoming, because now that we've got these young people hooked on porn, they're going to grow up with this as a normality in their lives.
Yep.
Where I'm not saying it's not an issue with us, because it is definitely still an issue. The stats are 91% of men, have look at porn and 60% some women. Now it's a little bit lower than that in the stats we're going to talk about, 14 to 18.
Yeah.
But so I'm not saying it's not a problem.
But it's so much more prevalent for younger people.
But it's something that honestly, you know, as a pastor, you're going to have to deal with a lot more coming up in the upcoming decades,
and have to deal with the after effect
absolutely
of a porn addiction.
Absolutely.
Because the amount of graphic porn that younger people are consuming right now, and how that studies show have impacted the brain, impacted intimacy, some permanent damage in some ways, but some of what we'll read tonight is there's a lot of things you can heal from and reverse from.
And that's the good news
of
it.
And so before we get started tonight, something I just want to make very clear, okay? This is not, our goal is not to shame you or to fill you with judgment or to condemn anybody.
No.
The whole point of tonight is to help give you a couple of next steps to be able to find healing from pornography. And if you do struggle with pornography, if you do have a sex addiction, if you do struggle with intimacy, we just want to let you know there's no shame. You can find healing from your past. You are loved here. You're accepted here. But we are going to push you in some ways to take some next steps.
And I would say it's also, I think that was brilliant. I think it's also an awareness thing.
Yes.
Because I'm afraid that there are some parents out there that don't understand the dangers and or the availability of
availability is a huge one.
What is out there and what their kids are probably actually
It couldn't be my kid.
Yes.
You know, couldn't be my kid. That's the thought.
That is exactly
and
right.
then the kid ends up dabbling in some things. And so just to become aware
of
some of those things.
And it's a slippery slope.
Yeah. And so, Brad, how about you just start us off? These are, you're going to read us some statistics, and maybe I'll chime in on a couple. But this is all from Fight the New Drug, which is an incredible website, organization, nonprofit that works with individuals. You can go to the website, Fight the New Drug. But these are all just, you know, statistics that we found from that.
I think it's interesting, even that terminology.
That's what it's being considered because of what it does to your does to your brain.
First one here. Most kids today are exposed to porn by age 13. I was actually shocked that was that high.
It's so it's like guys are like 9 and 10 and girls are like 13 to 14. So like the averages are around there.
That does not. Okay. Listen to this. With 84.4% of males and 57% of females ages 14 through 18 having viewed porn.
Yeah.
That's
a
lot.
And again, this is, so when you're pulling statistics from people, obviously you need people to be willing to share.
Right.
Okay. And you need people to be honest about but even just how accessible and available porn is, even if people aren't intentionally going out and searching for porn,
right.
Like I said, it's all over TikTok.
Right.
Like you could just be scrolling, you know, watching videos, watching reels on Instagram, and something inappropriate pops up, and that's pornography. Now, that's not you intentionally seeking it out, but what it does to your brain then starts to trigger something.
And it probably leads to an interest of, I wonder what else.
Right. And that's where I see a lot of young people falling.
A curiosity thing,
yes,
if nothing else. And then once a curiosity starts, it goes into the next step. And it's exactly what we said. It's a slippery slope.
Yep.
And all of a sudden now we've got an issue on our hands.
Yep. Hey, next statistic. Despite how unrealistic and toxic that pornography can be, 1 in 4 young adults list pornography as the most helpful source to learn how to have sex. And 53% of boys and 39% of girls believe that pornography is a realistic depiction of sex.
I don't even know what to do with that.
It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But it's what troubles so many teens is you see this perfect depiction of what perfect sex looks like growing up. Supposedly. What it's supposed to.
Yeah.
And then you get into a relationship and it doesn't look the way that you saw.
Yeah.
It's cinematically produced. And then it just starts to eat you alive. Or you start to try to recreate certain things. And that's one way that pornography can seep into your marriage.
But when you think about this, you know, what other source is there?
Right.
To go out and, because it's something I can remember back thinking, okay, what's this whole sex thing about, and where do you go to find help? You don't go to your parents,
right?
You know, and I think back of when my kids were growing up, this is a topic that that I should have really walked through them, and for some reason it's a taboo subject, and I think the church has honestly made it a taboo subject to some degree.
Absolutely,
maybe to great degree. That and it turns sex into something, instead of God creating it as beautiful and amazing in the right context and the right relationship, it's turned it into something dirty and so embarrassing, and you don't talk about that. That's how it was when I was growing up. I don't know if that's your experience.
Well, and I've been honest with, whenever I've done a sex sermon, which I seem to be the one that gets asked to do the sex sermon. Part of my growing up in purity culture, I had a huge fear of sex. Part of it was because of pornography and are these the expectations? Part of it was just because of me being a germaphobe. Part of it was just growing up in purity culture and not knowing what to expect, because my whole life I'm being told sin, 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 sin. And now all of a sudden I'm supposed to flip a switch and be okay with sex. And so I remember having a huge fear that I had to go to counseling for that first year of marriage, just to be able to be intimate with my wife because of what my growing up experience was like. And that wasn't because of my parents. They were always available and open to talk about it. But part of what we're going to be talking about too is there are some effective tools and there are some ineffective tools. Okay. Research what we know now. The way that I grew up was ineffective in combating pornography. And so we'll get into that a little bit later. Why don't you read the number 3?
Research shows that people who consume porn tend to become less satisfied in their relationships, less committed to their partner, and more accepting of cheating. And I've read many statistics that will tell you this. And the other thing that happens is, and maybe this comes up later, and you can speak to that, but my understanding is once you start partaking in porn and things, it's never enough. There's always, you always want more and more, either more graphic or more, and so that,
and you start dabbling in things that you never thought you would ever dabble in.
Exactly. And now all of a sudden it does end up, we say, well, I'm not going to cheat, but it gets to a point that the screen isn't enough. Now we got to find somebody. And there's statistic after statistic.
Well, and even especially the more graphic stuff, as you think, and again, it was different with when you growing up. With me, when I was growing up, I first was introduced to pornography on YouTube. Now, YouTube has some pretty strict, in the United States, community standards, no nudity, okay? And so a lot of what I was watching was just what was considered softcore pornography. As I grew older and out of YouTube, wanting more, started going to more of those hardcore websites, looking for more. Now, what a lot of people then who aren't able to overcome that addiction do is now it's not just about the hardcore websites. Now it's about more aggressive type porn or abusive type porn, or looking for, like I said, the virtual reality type porn, taking it to things that you never thought you would dabble in, but then because your brain is craving more and more,
it's a drug.
It is a drug.
Exactly.
And as I've done research from the book Unwanted, which is an incredible book that I highly suggest for any parent or for any person who's looking at navigating a pornography struggle. What I've learned is that this is equated to the type of drug of not just like marijuana as a plant, but like cocaine and heroin.
Yeah, I've seen those studies also.
It has the same effect on your brain.
Right.
So you can we're obviously pastors, and we see some of the Christian arguments that can be made. From just a psychological and a scientific standpoint,
take away that part, just what it does to your body,
what it
and
does
your
to
mind,
your body
and relationships,
and intimacy is just crazy.
Exactly.
Number 4, research involving current and former porn stars suggests that exploitation and trafficking are common experiences in the porn industry, with pornography ranking as the 3rd most common form of human trafficking reported to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And this was a huge one of something I learned when I was at Anderson University working with a trafficking organization, Stripped Love.
Yeah.
Pornography, a lot of what you're watching is more times than not all the time, more times than not, there's trafficking or abuse involved. And it's like 90% of porn stars, as they're referred to, or people who take part in porn videos who are usually come from strip clubs sometimes. 90% of strippers say that there was abuse involved. And as you're watching that, even if you're watching what looks like oh, they're both consenting, or it's both Happy Gilmore. You're able to recognize, like, if you know that now, you're still supporting perhaps someone being trafficked.
Yeah.
And it's a secondary support, but it's still
it
just breaks you.
And I don't think most people, and especially in the church, even understand the whole trafficking thing.
Right.
I don't believe. I think a lot of people don't believe it's actually happening.
Right.
It's over there. It's overseas somewhere. It's over.
Right.
And there's so much of it happening here, right under our own nose.
Yeah. Just a couple of
more than what we could ever imagine.
Yeah. Just a couple of facts for you. Super Bowl week is the #1 week in America for sex trafficking, because you've got all of these billionaires who come on in and exploit men and women. Now, this statistic can be construed because everyone thinks theirs is the fastest growing thing. But at one point in the last 5 years, human trafficking was the fastest growing industry in America.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And so you've just got different. And again, trafficking, we have people at Crossbridge who their children have been trafficked. And so it's such a real issue, and the porn industry fuels that economy.
Yes.
It funds it in a lot of ways. Number 5, according to the UK survey of over 22,000 adult women, 16% reported having been forced or coerced to perform sex acts the other person had seen in porn. This goes to kind of similar what we were saying of the expectations of sex in relationships.
Right.
You saw the video, you saw this. 16% of those relationships says, we want you to replicate that, or let's try this position out, or let's try out this, what I saw. And a lot of times it can take away the intimacy of that.
And I think that's the point, is that now we're not talking about mutual respect for two people. It's a matter of a self-satisfaction type of deal.
Right.
Thing.
Absolutely.
And it just,
Grandpa Gillespie, good to see you. Next one study shows that approximately 45% of teens who consumed pornography did so in part to learn about sex.
Which goes back to what we talked about earlier.
Yep.
And I think part of that is, honestly, as raising a Christian family, we've got to get better. We've got to get over the hiccups of talking to our children about sex.
Yep.
And
we'll talk about the importance of that in the next steps. What you just said, though, is one of the biggest reasons why teens struggle with pornography.
Yes.
Because their parents don't talk in a healthy way about sex.
Correct.
And it's just crazy. Last one for our research. There's so much out there, but research has demonstrated that overcoming a pornography habit is absolutely possible, and that over time, pornography's negative effects can be managed and largely reversed.
That is, and to me, that's the positive end of this.
Yep.
And we've talked about how destructive it is and things like that, but unpack that a little bit more, because when I read that stat that you gave us, I thought that was really interesting.
Yep. And so when I did my sermon, I wanted to make sure people knew that we're trying to heal from a pornography addiction, just like you're trying to heal from a physical injury. You're still going to have some of the scar tissue from the previous, damage that was done. There's some times that you'll have surgeries where you will get something repaired and there will still be something left over from the past. Pornography is the same way, like many addictions. Alcohol, drug addiction, food addiction. You can find healing from it, and like they said, in a lot of ways, reverse some of the negative side effects. Because like we talked about, pornography leads to, this is what I talked about in my sermon, pornography leads to anger issues. Pornography leads to desensitizing towards sex and sexual intercourse. So sometimes marriages will think, I have a hard time getting aroused, so we watch pornography to help accomplish that. Well, studies have actually shown that porn desensitizes you. And so, yes, you can get turned on in the moment, but you're just prolonging the inevitable. I could just keep going on and on and on about different things, but there's so many ways that you're damaging your brain, damaging your intimacy, that what's cool, as we just hit on, it's not, though, irreversible.
Right.
There might still be some things that will take you years and years.
There's always going to be some damage left over, but this is one that gives us hope that
there is a lot of ways that you can find healing from and get back to a healthy way. And so I just want to share this quote. This is from the book Unwanted, like I talked to you about. If you're interested in how to have this conversation, or even just furthering this conversation on pornography. Here's a quote from page 7. The gospel tells us that our belovedness will never change based on our wanderings, which means we're always going to be loved by God no matter where we go.
Right.
However, our belovedness is intended to change our wanderings. So and this is something we've talked about all the time.
All the time.
You don't follow God to earn grace.
Right.
You have grace as a free gift,
right.
and so now your life should reflect that in your following.
And when you have a changed heart, it's, and I think that's one reason why I think Christians understand people who've given their life to Christ and struggle with this pornography. That's where some of the guilt comes in, and that's what Satan uses.
Yes.
Because you realize, okay, this is hurting God also.
Yep.
That I'm not supposed to be doing this.
Yep.
I shouldn't be doing this. This is actually hurting me. And there's that battle of your sinful nature that we talk about all the time, and the Spirit in you saying, this, we need to go a different direction.
Yep.
And then we start beating up on ourselves.
Yep.
And I think I love that is that our belovedness will never change based on our wanderings. Mm-hmm. God still loves you, even if you're dealing with this, even if you're struggling with this. God still loves you, but we do have power over this also.
We want to push you to be able to, take control of what the enemy has stolen.
Exactly.
See, and this is something I just wrote down. Porn leads us to killing our self-esteem. Mm-hmm. It kills our view of what sex is supposed to be like, just like we, talked about. It kills our intimacy. It kills our confidence. It goes so much further than we even imagine. It's so much deeper than just watching something.
Right.
Or engaging in something. You're doing something to your body, and it leaves some damage. Another quote, 77% of those who struggle with sexual addiction report coming from a rigid family, a rigid ruled household.
Yeah.
And 87%, this goes to kind of similar to what you were talking about earlier, Brad. I'll explain why. 87% report coming from a disengaged family. Dr. Patrick Keynes, he's the leading researcher for sexual compulsivity. And here's why this connects to what you were saying. Another quote from the Unwanted book. Lust blooms in the soil of disengagement. Yeah, you were talking earlier about how a lot of times parents, and this is just speaking to parents, will disengage themselves from this conversation on sex. Mm-hmm. Or another type of disengagement, just not being present in your kids' lives.
Yeah.
And both of those things research has shown. Actually, all three things, like we said. The rigid household, where you're just going to do a ton of rules and punishment and shame culture. 77...
And that happens a lot of times because people don't know how to do it any other way.
Exactly.
And it's just something that as parents, we've got to learn to be better and have the conversation.
Yep.
We haven't learned how to have a conversation, especially with a teenager. I mean, they're goofy anyway. Mm-hmm. And it's something that you gotta figure out the way to do it.
Here, ask me the question, Jordan, how do we do it?
Jordan, how do we do that?
I'm so glad you asked, Brad. If you're a parent, here's what I want to encourage you to do. Okay, I want you to do two things. One, because we know now that shame and punishment approaches, this is just research, okay?
Which is all my generation knew.
And even me growing up. So like my parents, this is shame and punishment approaches are ineffective.
Right.
Okay? Which goes totally against what we think. Okay? Here's how you handle in that conversation. If you're not going to punish somebody, if you're not going to, take away the cell phone, okay? Here's what you do. Rather than using shame and punishment, substitute shame with conversations about where our true identity is.
Oh, that's deep there.
And the second part is just as important, and this is something I'm a huge advocate for. Substitute punishment with cooperative boundaries and accountability. Here's what I mean, okay? If you've got a teenager who is struggling with pornography, or if you've got a spouse who is struggling with pornography, or if you've got a friend who is struggling with pornography, rather than setting the boundary for them and setting up the punishment for them, bring them in on the conversation. Let them help you decide what's the proper way. Let them know, hey, this isn't acceptable. Okay, if you're a parent, this is not acceptable in our household. How can we come to terms?
Right.
And it's not about compromising. It's not like, okay, you can watch it on every day that ends with Y, and it's not about a compromise. It's about cooperating together to come with terms, and then you give that person ownership rather than just setting the standard.
Because more likely, there's also something inside them that knows that they need to quit this.
Most times. Now, again,
a vast majority.
Once you get to a certain point. Because usually when you start something new and it's exciting and it's an enjoyable and it feels good.
What is this hurting?
Right.
Yeah.
But eventually you get to the point where it becomes all consuming, where you realize you've gone too far.
Right.
Sometimes that's 2 years. Sometimes that's 10 years. More times than not, I would say every time when you do something like this that's unhealthy, you get to a point where your soul's just exhausted.
Right.
Because you can't fill the, like we were talking about earlier, because you can't fill the need enough.
Yes.
You can't get enough Coke.
You never will.
Can't get enough food. You can't get enough porn. So the biggest advice I give parents and people who are walking with this is, rather than setting up a shame and punishment culture, substitute it with, first, replace shame with helping your child know who they are in Christ. Your identity.
I wanted to come back to that because I think this is absolutely huge here. What you said, rather substitute shame with conversations about where our identity is rooted.
Yeah.
That is absolutely huge. But here I think is why a lot of people struggle with this, is because we don't know our own identity.
Absolutely.
And this is us finding ourselves of what is our identity in Christ.
Yeah.
And you know, we may not have a struggle with pornography, but we may have another identity crisis of I'm not good enough. I'm not. There are all kinds of things. So we've got to figure out ourselves of what is our identity. We are somebody in Jesus.
Yeah.
And we've got to fix that in ourselves first, so that we can pass that on to our children.
And you're seeing, and this is going to step on some toes, but it's okay. I'm going to try to handle this in the best way possible. You're seeing that a lot with this generation that we're in right now, of teens and kids placing their identity in their sexuality, placing their identity in their pronouns, placing their identity in their how they look, how they act, what groups they're in. And friends, whenever you place your identity in something, same with adults, your work, your job, your 401k, your salary, whenever you place your identity, whatever age you are, in something other than Jesus, and a child of God, you're going to be left empty-handed.
When we start chasing idols instead of the King, we have a problem.
Whatever that idol is.
And there's nothing healthy going to come out of that.
And
it's difficult. There's no question about that. Especially in the culture and society that we live in.
Well, and it's something that I think you have to continue to revisit. It's not like you're going to have days on and off that are good days where you feel confident and secure in who you are.
That's a great point.
And then you're going to have days that you really suck at your addiction, or you really are struggling with your confidence. You know me, I'm an emotional wreck sometimes, or sometimes just get really down on myself. Never. But sometimes I just get really discouraged about either a conversation we had, or how a meeting went, or how a sermon went. I'm just like, man, I beat myself up, and sometimes you guys slap me upside the head and remind me who you are. And so last piece of advice, actually there's two final next steps I want to give you, and then we'll get out of here. And the second one is something we've talked a lot about, is whenever you give up something unhealthy,
you got to replace it.
Got to replace it with something healthy. It's the saying that we say, give up, give in. If you're going to give up porn, you can't just
give it up and not replace it with something.
You've got to replace it with something
going to
healthy.
fill that void.
And so whether it's whatever time you would be using watching porn, fill it with perhaps a better hobby. Fill it with time alone with God. Fill it with exercise. Fill it with community, with fellowship, with friends, with worship. You've got to replace that time.
Right.
And as you continue to heal from it, it becomes so much easier to say no. Okay. Last piece of advice.
And this one's brilliant.
Last piece of advice, and this is something I talked a lot about in the sermon that I did. You have to figure out what is triggering your sexual desires. Because what research has found is, it's not just you saw someone hot and you're ready to, masturbate, or you're ready to watch porn. Obviously, that happens. What researchers are finding, though, with pornography addictions is, more times than not, there are things fueling those struggles, such as anger, such as mental illness, such as past trauma, such as addiction, such as insecurities. And so more times than not, you have to heal first from what's in your past before you can start healing from pornography.
Yeah, and I think that's huge. And this triggering thing, it also comes back to figuring out where you're vulnerable. I can tell you for so many people,
or your blind spots.
What's your blind spots? Areas where you're vulnerable if you're home alone.
Yep.
And you're lonely, don't have anything else to do.
Yep.
Now all of a sudden, here's something that, I can tell you, I was on a team of guys that traveled, and we got talked about this all the time. You're away from your family.
Yeah.
You're alone at night in a hotel room. What are you going to do with that time?
Yep.
And how do you? And so it's those kind of things. Understanding where are my vulnerabilities, where are there chances that I'm going to slip up?
What are the things triggering?
Yep. And
becoming aware of those triggers. Then
exactly,
you're not going to be able to remove them.
No.
Not all of them.
No.
Okay. And this is with PTSD, with past trauma. As you enter into the world, you're going to be surrounded by things that trigger you. So the next step is becoming aware of that, starting to heal from that, and then have a healthier response when those triggers take place.
Yeah.
And a lot of ways you can do that is by having a backup plan if something is to arise. To say it bluntly, having an escape route.
Right.
So whether it's physical, mental, or emotional, having an escape route
and that goes
your
back
struggle.
to scripture of resist the devil.
Yep.
Run the other way.
Yep.
And that's part of that.
Yep.
It's not only physically, but it's also emotionally.
Yeah, and this is something when Paul's talking about, it's a passage that gets taken out of context so often where we say, God will never give you anything that you can't handle. Like, well, actually, Paul's talking about sexual immorality in that passage. There's some things we can't handle, and that's why, like, just in this world, why we need God. Because if we could handle everything, we'd be God. But God also didn't tell you to go to your girlfriend's house. I heard Trevor actually shared this with me. I think I shared this before. You can set yourself up to do things that you can't handle.
That's
and this
correct.
is to your point.
That's a great point.
You've got to then set yourself up to succeed.
Exactly.
Yes, it would be a blast, I'm sure, to spend the night at your girlfriend's house or your boyfriend's house.
And that's what's knowing where it's vulnerable.
And that's what's knowing where you're vulnerable.
Yep.
And so, hey, friends, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Like I said, I taught on this a couple of months ago for a message. I don't even remember what it was called. Image of God something. I don't know. It's on our YouTube.
Yeah, good luck finding it.
The cover of the YouTube video is Let's Talk About Porn. So go just scroll through our sermons, find that cover, and you'll be good. But if you are interested in more research, more information on how to navigate this, the book Unwanted, it's a book about unwanted sexual desires and healing from it, and it's incredible.
That's cool.
The Church of God, our movement that Crossbridge is a part of it, this is the book, Unwanted, that they suggest to all of their churches and pastors. So that's how I came across it. It was suggested to me because they knew I was teaching on porn. But don't be scared to have the conversation. If you have a child, if you do have a spouse, and if you are someone who is struggling just by yourself with pornography, reach out. We'd love to help you out. So,
yeah,
hey,
great
friends,
stuff.
Thank you so much for tonight. We will see you next week for game night.
Next week already.
It's going to be a blast. So,
awesome.
Hey, have a great rest of your evening.
See you, everybody.